Okay, so I'm going to do a tutorial on setting up this rigged model for UVs that we can take into Allegorithmic's substance painter, and we'll go and paint like some metallic stuff on them. But in order to do that right now, the way this guy's been made, if I select under Windows Hypergraph Hierarchy, here's his setup. And if I select just his mesh and look at the UVs, they're sort of all overlapping. The way he's been made, I wasn't real careful. I didn't go through and like adjust the UV map as I was making him, which is okay because I can do it fairly easily after the fact. Sometimes, depending on how much modeling you're doing, you may want to go, if you're going to do replicated parts, you may want to set those up appropriately. But in this case, the replicated parts are these little cylinders and spheres and things like that you probably couldn't have set those up anyway because you didn't know how you were going to lay them out or what parts of the body you were going to make maps into. So what I'm thinking is that we'll probably make like a torso map and then take the arms and the legs and put those in their own map, and then the head can be in its own map. Usually you can do a single map for the whole thing, but the problem is depending on the resolution you want to go for, and Allegorithmic allows for a lot of resolution, we may want to have 3 maps usually for a body. So one for the torso, one for or the upper body, one for the lower body, and then one for the head. So how we can split this up into parts is we can basically select these elements that we want to separate out into their own map and move those in the UV editor so that we can select them together and then rearrange them in their own map. So if we go to the UV editor now, we'll have this type of a setup. Before I go and do anything like that, I want to take these and apply their own material to them. So I'm going to assign new material. We'll call it a blend, and we'll name it Bender Mat Lower, or L body for lower body. Then we can, like, just to make sure that we can tell the difference and see the maps, we're going to go ahead and just assign like a blue to it for now. So now with that mapped, we can select all of these UVs in the, let me hide the image so we can actually see the UVs here. Select all of the UVs, and under polygons here in the UV editor, we will hit layout, and you want to make sure you've got this translate shells and rotate shells set up so that it will try to pack these UVs to fill this square as tightly as possible. So we'll say layout. So now we have this nice UV map that lays out all the cylinders and spheres appropriately. These are the cylinder caps, which we may or may not care much about. The reason I put these spheres in there is in order to cover up the caps, but depending on how well I've done in terms of the bones, the caps may show, so we'll leave those. What are these? Oh, that's the feet. That's his feet. So yeah, it lays out really well. In fact, it does so well it actually tries to stagger across these UV points, which in terms of Allegorithmic, because you can actually paint by poly, and you could drag across, this overlapping sawtooth effect here may or may not be something we want if we wanted to make like a specific color. Although you could then just drag like individual polys, it would take more chance. I kind of like the fact that it's trying to map it as tightly as possible. The one thing I notice is that it's right on the edge here, which means there'll be some bleeding across the top. So we can just grab all these UVs and shift them up just a tiny bit. probably make these end caps on the tips of the legs and stuff smaller, because we'll select by UV. We'll make all of these end caps smaller because you don't need that much. They're not going to be seen most of the time, and that'll free us up to make some of this other stuff bigger and add more detail. So if you just select part of each one of these islands and then select the shell, it'll select everything, and we can scale them smaller and then move them. Make sure you don't have any overlap. So we can rotate this, sort of pull it into place. Yeah, that'll buy us a little more space. So the feet are fine. What are these? I usually select by faces so I can see what I'm looking at on the actual model. So that's his entire left leg. What are these then? Those are the spheres. So that's odd. So these leg parts have actually become smaller than the actual spheres, and it should probably be the other way around. So let's fix that. UV, because we're not gonna then you're not gonna have much detail on the actual long tubes, and these spheres are relatively small. So we'll select the shells for those legs, move those off to the side, and probably let's lay them out so they're even, and we can get the generally the same size on them. Zooming in big here. So again, if you work close, you don't get much control. If you drag and rotate and move further out, you can get it relatively straight. Not perfect, but there we go. And if you really want to get it straight, we can just well, there is a bit of a rotation here. When we make them bigger, we'll scale this up with these others. Let's get them next to each other. So at least they're relatively the same layout here. So select shell, move that one up. Just hit G to make it bigger. All right, and then scale those to get. So one way we can tell, this is something I like to do a lot, in order to see the effect, or how many, like, it's kind of like the way Unity uses texels. You can use the texel map and see how big a texel is going to be. We can do the same thing with this material that we've set up on the object. So if we select one of these legs and go to the blend, in this blue color, if we just click and make a map in Maya, we can do this checkerboard pattern. So now we can actually see the size of the checks on the pattern and see that it's whether it's relatively the same size. Let's select these so we can lay out the map some more. So we want these spheres to be a little bit smaller than the actual cylinders here. So let me select this UV shell, move it into position so that it overlaps better. Yeah. And then we can take all of these and scale them smaller. Let's put them off right now. We'll lay these out better. So now that I actually have this shell bigger, I should be able to get it a little bit straighter in terms of the rotation. It's pretty good. Packing wise, by packing I mean how tightly packed these things are together. Oops, didn't select the shell. you just want a little bit of a leeway so you can actually drag select to make some modifications later. In fact, we may stack them vertically this way. Select shell, so we'll have one leg underneath the other. And then, so what we can do now is we'll just make them wider, scale them a little, and you can see how the checks start to get tighter. Depending on how much, it won't matter with the distortion, because when we go to paint this in Allegorithmic, if there's if the checks would normally be relatively square in terms of the tiling on this object. So you'd want to, that's relatively square right there, which takes up a lot of the map, but then you can scale it down a little bit, pull it off, so that you just get them proportional. You don't have to normally, depending on how you're going to paint the texture maps, you don't have to do that, because if you're painting texture onto this using the UV map, depending on how the program, like Allegorithmic, will actually paint it relative, so it'll stretch the map within the UVs as opposed to here. We'll show you what that means in a minute. We'll just position these down here. Let's see here now. It almost fits. Just scale them a little bit. Actually, we'll scale this way. And then I can actually, now, here's an argument for whether or not you want to, we've got a bunch of empty space here. We could pack some other object using its UV maps here from the rest of the model in order to give it more space. But depending on the way the material is set up, it may or may not overlap the same. So I'm just going to pull this and scale it vertically. So yeah, we'll get some distorted squares, but it won't be that bad. Select shell. So yeah, this looks pretty good for the legs. Select shell. I'm just pulling this foot off the edge here so that it's not that close. Yeah, that lays out pretty well. So now we can do the same for the body. I'll leave this up, and I'm going to select this material and take off the checkerboard. So in order to check off the checkerboard, all you have to do is just break the connection. So if you right click on this color key where we created the map, say break connection, now it'll go back to the way it was. So now we have to think about which parts we want to use for the torso. Let's look at the UV map, or the UV editor. So maybe we just make 3 maps, do the head, or actually we could do the torso and the head together. Although there's a lot of stuff for the head with the eyes and everything. Maybe the torso and the arms. I'm thinking about it in terms of like UV space, like how much of the map gets applied to it. Let's see what this looks like if we just lay these out. Select the UVs, polygon, layout. So there's our torso, or cylinder for our, wait. Oh yeah, because we don't have the arm. So cylinder for upper body, lower, and then this is the hips, which is totally out of proportion in terms of the size. So this one should be the biggest, and then these should be smaller, and then these are just the caps for the cylinders, which should actually be pretty big. Just trying to figure out if I've got room for arms and stuff here with this. Probably not, so we'll just leave it detailed because we may, when we go to paint this map, we may want to do a little more. So I'm going to select this UV set. Select all these faces now that we have them selected, and then right click and assign a new material, and we'll call it a blend. We'll call this one Bender Matte Torso, and we will assign a checkerboard to it so we can check the UVs. Now we want to select this island. Zoom this in a little bit so you can see it better. And then, so select shell, scale this down, pull it off to the side. This one is the larger. Actually, we'll just scale them both up. Select shell. Probably go ahead and scale them like this. This one can be a little bit smaller since it's a smaller cylinder. Select shell. It's the lower one. Select them both and just make sure they're within this 0 to 1 space. So now, which ones are the smaller? So that's upper. That's, wait. Can't tell which. This one's the lower one, or the upper body. Select shell. Let's put them together. Select shell. That one's probably the lower. So these two are part of this lower. Get a wireframe here. You can see they're part of that lower torso that where the caps are hidden. So we can actually make those a little bit smaller. And it's a smaller cylinder anyway. So select the shell. We'll pull that off to here. Select the shell, and maybe what we do here is like select the entire shell. Oops. And scale those a little bit smaller, and then take this, put it together. So select the shell, and I'm going to make the, and it's a little bit bigger. It makes sense for this sphere to be a little bit bigger than the cylinder it connects to. Yeah, that looks good. And then this cylinder, oops, did the wrong one. Select shell. I'm just going to scale it a little bit here, wider. I'm just trying to give it some space, and then we'll take these two, scale those a little bit bigger, and just try to pack them in there. It looks pretty good. Let's look at this in. Yeah, I've got a lot of distortion. So I'm thinking, this should probably rotate. And be wider than it is long, because it's actually it should be twice as, on a cylinder, the texture shouldn't be square, it should be twice as wide as it is tall, because that's the way cylindrical objects map, in order to get perfectly square pixels on it. So I'm going to move this off to the side, and this one, and then we'll take the cylinder, select shell. Just watch what happens on these checkerboards here if I go wide. So it starts to square up. It's not perfectly square, but there we go. Now I can go a little bit smaller that way. And I can do the same thing with this cylinder. Select shell, scale it. Can turn this sphere on its side and do the same thing, because again it shouldn't be spherical. Select shell, E. Just trying to give it some more pixel density. Select shell. And then we'll just scale these to fit, because I don't care as much about the end caps. Probably more on the top one, neck, which is, I think, this one. Yep. So that one can be bigger. And since this one's facing down, can be a little bit smaller because it's not seen as often. And these could be smaller, but I'm going to leave them big because he will bend at some point and actually show. Those will show through. Select shell. I just want to straighten this sphere. I noticed that it's not rotated to be square. There we go. All right, so that's the map for the torso. Now I can select the arms. I'm going to leave the torso for now. I'll leave it checked so I can check the UVs against what I'm doing on the arms. I may end up wanting to put the arms with the head. I'm not sure yet. If you think about it, the arms have, well, they do have another, no they don't. The arms are basically less than the legs in terms of number of objects to map, because they're missing these feet. So they actually, it's almost a waste to use them. Maybe I could end up putting the legs and the arms together. We'll see. So I want to apply, I want to assign new material, make it a blend, we'll call it Bender Matte Arms. Let's see, go ahead and assign a checkerboard. So you can see how there's way too much, the spheres have way too much pixel density right now. There's a lot of overlap too. So if I go UV editor, and let me select those again. Actually, I think if I go, and then I just need to select. Now I have every object, so there's a lot of overlap here in terms of the way the original UV mapping worked. So again, if I just go polygons, layout, we're going to get somewhat better proportions, but you can see that the again, the spheres for some reason seem to get mapped really. They take precedent over cylinders. Yeah, we'll do that. So we can just select all these spheres. Select shell. Make sure, yep. Scale those down. Probably go wide with them just to kind of give that extra squareness for the pixels. Scale them smaller, put them up here. Now we'll have I'm guessing these are the cylinders. 4. Select shell. Yep, it's all of them. So they must butt right up to each other somehow. We'll move those over here. So again, we don't need these end caps to be nearly as big. I'll scale those small. And then these cylinders, let me figure out what's what. Select shell. I'm guessing, yeah. So like they're stacked on top of each other. Let's just pull them apart a little bit so we can see the gap. We'll rotate them. Actually, we can just scale them this way to get them more square. Let's take these spheres, select shell, and we're going to rotate those like this. Let's see if this shows up under the channel or the attribute. Nope. I was trying to see if I could actually see the rotational axis for this, but I can't. So if I did, I could set it at like 90 degrees or something like that. Just get it as straight as I can, which isn't that straight right there. Then position those there, and I can take these, select shell. I believe they scale this way. Yep. So again, I'm just trying to make the cylinders twice as wide as they are tall. And the same thing with the spheres. I don't know if you can see this, there's a little bit of a diagonal, you can see this sort of diagonal moire when you zoom out. That's because they aren't quite rotated square, but that's okay for a sphere, it doesn't really matter. Let's see, pull these back. Got a lot of extra pixels here. So we'll have, I like to have more texture on the upper body than the lower, because you generally will see the upper body in like 3/4 shots, kind of thing like that. You're going to see more detail. You don't notice as much on the legs if it's lower poly. So what we'll do is we'll make these. Select shell, and on the scale them just a little wider. Let's pull these down. I tend to favor pixel density over squareness. Select shell. Because of the tools that I use, generally I don't have to worry about the way the tool works is that it doesn't care if it's if there's a distortion in the UVs. It'll actually fix them automatically, or it paints them, because I'm applying it in the world view. The texture ends up getting distorted on it, but that extra pixel density will help up close, especially for like normal maps and things where you'll see some aliasing if the texture map's too small. Alright, so we'll leave that. Now we'll just do his head. And neck. I think I've actually got 3 parts to this head. There's a neck, the helmet, the eyes, and the visor. So we're going to have, we'll lay these out, and then we'll apply these materials, because we're going to have several different materials. I mean, we may not have several different materials because we can actually just paint them. So actually, yeah, we'll all have separate different materials. We'll just apply the materials in Substance Painter. So we want, let's see, UV editor. Again, we have all this overlap. Now, in this case, because of the way it's been created, I've modified this head using a bunch of pixel or polygon modeling tools. There's going to be some bad geometry in terms of UVs in here. So let me first lay it out to get the relative size, and then I'll pick the actual cylinder of the head. See, like here's the visor. Let's see what we have. There's the mouth, and probably maybe there's a back. Oh yeah, there's a cylinder inside where I just, which is pretty wasteful because his mouth isn't going to have all that extra geometry. It's just the way I made the mouth. So the cool thing is we can delete that now. So I only need part. There's the neck. Let me get that out of the way. So select shell. Put that over here. Select shell. And this is the mouth. I just need to select. I'm just pulling everything apart right now to try to figure out what's what. So let's do face. Figure out, like, let me just select the faces that I don't want, figure out where they are on the map. So probably I want to delete like these. Yep. So we'll delete those and get rid of those. Seeing how close I'm getting here. Yeah, I can get rid of those. So I'm just deleting the faces so they don't take up space on the map. I can then select the appropriate top or caps and get rid of those too. So I can lose that. Because all I care about is this little edge for just the mouth part. That's a neck. Sorry. There's the back face on the teeth, which I'm going to go ahead and keep for now. I may actually extrude this. I can't do it now that I've modeled them, but there's the back face for that, and this is that's the lower face of the mouth, so I'm going to get rid of that. Yeah, so now the teeth are just this one little spot right here, these plane that doesn't have a back face. So what we can do is scale those. They need to be a little bit bigger. And then rotate. To get them square. This is the visor going around and the mouth. That's the visor. Let's see. So for that, obviously that needs to be a lot wider. Actually, it probably needs to actually map, like I need to do it with a cylinder or cylindrical mapping. So let's do that. We'll take this, because right now it's overlapping. So if I select all of these faces, we won't do the same thing on this one yet. Then we go UV cylindrical, and it's going to pop up this cylindrical mapping around it, which you can change. So we can make it go all the way around. But right now the orientation of that cylindrical map is going the wrong, it's oriented the wrong way. In order to fix that, you have to click on this little part of the widget, this T, and that will bring up a second widget that lets you select the rotation, and then you can rotate vertically. So you can see here how it's starting to orient. As I change these, it changes them in the editor, in the UV editor. So now if I scaled this, the main thing here to think about is I'm doing this cylindrical mapping, and there's going to be a little bit of distortion here, so like you have to go wider because of the way the map works. So we may want to like select these UV edges and these. Let's see. I'm just trying to figure out a way to stretch this wide so that the mapping works. Actually, we'll do it when we have the checkerboard on there for now. But that's roughly the way it should map. And now we'll do the same exact thing with these faces for the inner part of the mouth. So we'll go UV, cylindrical, select that T to bring up the other widget for rotation, and then just get it to go until, and look at it in the UV editor so you can actually see that it's straight. And then you can go into the UV editor and scale it down. So there's the mouth. Now we have to do the head itself, which I'm thinking is this. Yep. So we want to do the same thing. UV, our face. Actually, let's select the island. We'll pull it off to itself. So select the shell. We get all of those edges selected. Pull that out here. Then you can select all these faces, and you can do cylindrical or spherical, however you want to map this. Probably spherical may work, and then we can fix it here at the edges. And so we'll do UV instead of cylindrical. Here's what cylindrical would look like. And you get this distortion up at the top because it's basically projecting flat on these top edges. If we do UV spherical, then we get something a little bit more accurate, where it's taking the top and the bottom into consideration, and you get this on the side. So it actually looks pretty good. Yeah, we'll leave that for now. And then, so the other thing is that we don't need to project this bottom cap on the neck. Let me see, make sure. I think I have a bunch of edges to it. There we go. So I've selected the bottom. I don't need to wrap it this way. I just need to project flat. So I can go to the top view here. And if I go wireframe, you see I'm looking at it this way, and I can just say UV based on the camera. And that will now lay out these UVs that were wrapped. It'll lay them out flat and project them flat. And I may, let's see what's going on here. I think this is just the very tip. Let's see. Of his head, yeah. Rather than distort that, I'm going to probably just project that too. So UV based on camera. And it can be obviously a lot smaller because it's just a little point. I think in reality, Blender probably has this antenna off the top that would cover this up normally, but I don't really want to worry about that for now. Let's see. What else am I? Oh, his eyes are here. So his eyes can be a good bit smaller too. select shell. So there's his eyes. Scale those. And again, because they're spheres, we want to go wide with them. Now his eyes are relatively plain on a cartoon character. You may not care as much about how the eyes map because they're going to be just basically a flat color for the most part. These are, what is this? So this appears to be, and this is another thing where it got mapped weird. There's a couple of things going on here. I've got these faces that are just flat. This is why you have to go and like map this thing individually. So if we select the edge loop, this face loop right here, and then just go to the front view, we can project based on the camera, UV, camera based, and we'll get this nice straight on projection of his visor. Pull that off. What are these? Oh, these are the back planes behind his. One of them is actually the front visor, and the other two are the back planes. So those can stay small. I don't really care that much about them. Although I can just project them. So I will go to this front view again to get the accurate projection on it. UV camera based. So now we have those. Let's pull those off. Now there is this one thing where I have the visor. Actually the inner ring here too of the visor. Let's go select by face, 1, 2, double click, and then I get that entire inner ring, and you can see it's all flat here. So I need to do that same cylindrical mapping trick. So UV, cylindrical, rotate, and zoom out here so I can see what's happening. I'm just trying to get them to go square. They don't have to be 100% square, just pretty close, because what you can always do once you get them squares, you can select the UVs and just scale them flat like that. Let's get that off to the side. So that got that inner ring mapped out. Now I have to worry about this. These two planes. I have a ring around one of them. The trick is which one. Actually, I can just select these faces. Yeah, pull them off to the side like that. So you see where I left this ring where I didn't select the edge loop around the edge. That's easy to fix. So I just pull those off, select these faces now, and do that cylindrical trick again. And it'll make it into a separate map. Then we'll rotate. I don't really care. This is going to be inward facing polygons, so I don't really care about the size of it much. However, these I probably do. I'm going to select both of those and go back to my front face and then project based on the camera. We'll scale them so that they're the right size. Alright. So now we've got all of this. I think everything is mapped out now. Let's see. We got the neck. We have to obviously shift things into position because they're all over the place right now, but this gives us Now that everything is properly mapped, we can go ahead and assign a new material. We'll make it blend, and we'll call it Bender Head, Matte Head. I'm going to assign this checkerboard pattern so you can see where certain things get distorted based on the mapping. We'll fix that. It doesn't really matter that much, but yeah, it maps a lot better than probably what it did when we first started. So now if we select again all these parts, now we can lay them out. So yeah, the reason this isn't mapping right is because of this. There's the gap's not right. So we can fix that. We select this edge. It should select all the way around. We can scale that. Notice that it selects this edge on the visor, which we don't want to scale. So if we convert that selection to a not shell, sorry. First we have to convert the selection to UVs. Now if we hold down Control, we can deselect those UVs and only have these selected since they're separate islands. And we can scale this to get the shape more correct. Shift it back into position, which should start to shift this, kind of line these up a little bit better. That looks good. Then we have to fix this one part. Like that. Looks like there's something on the mouth. Maybe take, yeah, see we get this density right here on the mouth that we shouldn't have, so we can go and pull that up. Or just scale the whole thing. And then shift it. Something like that. Now the reason you're getting this tearing is because there's no geometry right now that closes these triangular, these are all n-gons. We can totally just triangulate this and fix that. So just making sure everything maps relatively good around. It does. Alright, so now we can take this entire head and, since it's the biggest part, select the shell and move it, scale it down, start figuring how things take up space in the map. Select the shell, this is the visor around, I believe, yep. Scale that down, same thing here. These are what? The neck and end caps. We can make those a good bit smaller and hide them in like one of these holes. In his face. Make them even smaller. What's this? That's the actual neck, so we can go wide. W. Maybe we'll rotate that and put it under the actual head. W. Okay. So his eyes, again, are relatively small compared to everything else and aren't that important. Now there is an issue with the eyes where I did an extrusion. We're going to have to capture that in a sec. I'll show you that in a minute. I think this is the visor. Yep. It's both faces of the visor. Let's see. Select shell. Yeah, two faces there. They were overlapping because of the way I projected them. So probably wherever I did that on the others, I only did it on individual faces, I think. So that shell, what is this? That's the inner ring of the visor. That can be a lot smaller. View. That's that glass. That can be smaller too, and since it's invisible, I can hide it really tiny inside of his mouth or something. Now we're starting to get some room for ourselves here. So if I move this up here, move his neck off to here. These visor glass parts can be smaller and here. Put that up under the neck. Those are back faces. They're not as important because they're not really seen and they're relatively dark. So I can make those here. This is the visor end. I'll put that there. What is this? That's his teeth. Those could be here. And then I have room to put these sideways. There. All right, let's see what that looks like. It's pretty good. All right, so now I can take, for the purposes of being able to go into Allegorithmic Painter and painting these textures on him, I can take this visor, even though it's mapped to his head. I want to take it, or it's rigged to his head bone. I can pull it off. I can't change the position because it's mapped to his head. Part of the issue is that if I have this in Allegorithmic, I won't be able to paint the back planes. I don't know if the transparency will show through. We'll check it out and see. We're going to leave it the way it is for now. All right, so if I select all of these polygons, we'll see that now everything is mapped out tightly into this group, but there's three different textures, and he's still rigged. So I'm going to go ahead and save this. I will change. I don't know if this checkerboard, I don't think it'll translate across to Allegorithmic Painter. But what we'll do is we'll go ahead and export him. Windows. Let's see. Hypergraph. Trying to figure out what to export. I don't really care about the character controller set so much. Just this. The rig, so I've got all of that selected. Go ahead and export that for Unity. So we're going to send to Unity selection. We'll make it, where am I putting this? I'm going to go out a couple for a project that I'm working in. So it'll be there. Wait. Yeah, here we go. We'll call this Bender Fixed UVs. Export as an FBX. Unsupported operations with Meshvert. Unsupported maps. 3. Oh, the checkers. Yeah, that's fine. Because we don't really care about that. He should export fine otherwise. Because the textures are procedurally generated out of Maya. It won't actually export a texture map. So I had some issues with the head not appearing in Substance Painter when I first tried this. So what I did is I went back, tried to debug it. I figured out that I probably needed to just delete history, but if I delete history on this model with my rig set up, then I'm going to lose the rigging. So what you can do as a backup for that, this is kind of handy in Maya, is basically select your, in Hypergraph, select your mesh, and while it's rigged, let's just make sure it's rigged here, W, yeah, so it's still rigged. So while it's rigged, after you've painted your weights and everything's all set up, go to Skin, under Rigging, Skin, and Export Weight Maps. And you can set them to whatever size, make sure it's set for luminance, and then export. And then find a place to put these. It'll make a folder in this weight map, this Bender's weight map, fixed Bender weight map. Well, you can call it whatever you want. So we'll call this fixed Bender 2, because I've already done this. Weights. And hit save. And it'll say 30 skin maps will be written to disk. Proceed. So it's going to go and it's exporting all of these skin maps. Basically, it's exporting a skin map for every bone and every object. And what that does is it creates these texture files that are just, in our case, grayscale maps, but mostly white, since we've got full attachment for all of these bones except for maybe on the feet. And it'll export these weight maps for this. And now, with those weight maps saved, we can always re-import the weights so that we don't lose all of our painted weights. So we can go and delete all by type, history, which will lose the rigging. So now if I move the bone, it's bones, the mesh doesn't travel with it. And in this case, then I went and fixed elements of this helmet that I thought might be problematic, because this is the thing that wasn't importing. But then I also did an edit delete all by type history, which should get rid of all weird transformation or normal type issues that we would have with it. I also reorganized the UV maps on this helmet a little bit to make more room. And fixed the eye. I think it might have been the eye that was causing the problem, because where I had these eyes, I had some pupils on the Bender model. You can see where I kind of extruded these points off, and those I hadn't gone and fixed. So I went and fixed those on these eye shapes by basically just selecting these edges, double clicking and selecting the UV edges, and then moving them around on the UV map. So now that I've got this thing set up to where it'll import correctly into Substance Painter, I can select all of these parts, and so it's not bound right now. If I want to bind it, I have to go back and rebind it. So I'll select all of the meshes and then select all of the bones, just the control not the control rig, which is this, but the actual bones for the skeleton. And you can tell the difference because it'll say like hips, left up, left leg, left foot. There's a hierarchy, and if you look at these, it's like character control reference, and these are like hips effector, ankle effector, and these are these little character rig inverse kinematics setups and controls. So we don't want to rig those. We want to just rig the control skeleton, or not. Depends on how you want to reference it. It's like this is a reference skeleton, so you've got all of these parts here, these control shapes, which are all part of this, and then these are the actual Maya skeletal bones. So now if we select all of these and then go under rigging, skin, bind skin, it'll go and rig it. But now we're back to where we were in that the weights aren't going to be distributed. And all we have to do to fix that then is just select this part, just the mesh, and then say skin, import weights, import weight maps. Select our fixed bender weight maps 2. Now it's going to go and re-rig everything with the weights the way we had it before. So it's a nice little backup. And then we can actually check it and make sure that our weights are appropriate. So now that that's set up, we can select all of this and export for Unity. We don't necessarily need this for Unity. We don't need this character rig stuff because we don't have any animation on this model, and the mocap that we might use in Unity isn't going to be affecting this. It's going to be affecting these bones. You can export it if you want. You might end up doing something with it, but in our case, we don't need it. So File, Export to or Send to Unity, Selection, and we'll send it as this Bender Fixed UVs export. And now we can open Allegorithmic Substance Painter and start a new project. Okay, so in Substance Painter, you just want to say New. We're going to go with this Unity 5 Allegorithmic template. We need to select our model that we've saved, Bender Fixed UVs here. Or not save them, but open them. This create textures per UDIM is actually if you have multiple UV sets for each object, which can be useful. That kind of buys you more UV space, more maps, but we're going to leave that. We don't have that for this particular model. We don't have any baked maps yet, so we'll say OK. Should open our Bender. You're seeing this sort of reflection map in the model, and that's based on viewer settings in this environment, which we have mapped to it. You can change that environment using these different environment settings just by dragging them in, and you can change the amount of blur if for some reason you want to see it more. But you can see how it's getting its lighting, and it's a reflection map from the actual environment that you've dragged in there. The trick is it's not really, this isn't getting baked to the map, this stuff, but it's useful for seeing it in the material. We don't have any other kind of materials on this yet, but you'll see how that works in a second. So for the purposes of this tutorial, I'm going to probably just crank that down and leave it so that it shows it just on the model. The next thing we have to do, I'll get into all of this stuff down in our shelf in a minute, but the next thing we have to do on every model is basically bake some new map sets. So if you go down under texture set settings, there'll be this bake textures. So then if you do that, it's going to create all of these extra things that make Allegorithmic Substance Painter work, which is like smart materials and smart maps and things, and you'll see how that works in a sec. But you want to bake it for all texture sets. When I say bake for all texture sets, basically everything that we've made in Maya, our Bender Mat arms, Bender Mat head, Bender Mat torso, and I forgot to name the legs material, but that's there too. They're all individual textures, and we've set up the UVs for each one, and that's what we're seeing here. So it's going and baking these maps. I'll show you what they look like in a second. And the reason it's important to bake them is otherwise you're just sort of hand painting onto this thing, but the power of this particular tool is that it has these smart materials set up that basically lay out based on the geometry of the model. So that if we want rust in the corners, or we want to create these particles where it's like leaking oil and stuff around the legs, then that will actually, that can work based on these maps that we're baking right now, which analyze the geometry and create texture maps as control elements. So it's going to take a second. The way Substance Painter works is you get this preview, you have your UV maps, for the object. So you can paint in either one of these. You can paint across the geometry and it'll update the map, or you can paint in the actual map if you want to get precise and do straight lines and things. We're going to create all of our paint and our mask in this layers option, and then we're going to be working between these, and then here's the actual material properties that we'll play around with in terms of how it gets applied to the model. So now that our maps are baked, you see that we have some updates down here. So we have a position map, we have a thickness map, we have an ambient occlusion map, which you can actually see laid out across the texture in some of these, and then we have a normal and a world space normals. If we're going to paint and update our normals, the one thing we need to do is make sure that we set this normal mixing, because by default it won't update automatically. We have to set this to replace, and then we'll do that across all of our textures. And when we do that, we can actually go and update using these hard surfaces. I'll show you in a second. We can actually create the appearance of geometry without actually having to add geometry. So we'll do replace, and then replace. We'll go to the Bender Matte Torso here, and we'll start applying some materials. I'll show you how it works. So the first thing I want to do is, usually when I'm doing this, the first thing I'll play around with is these smart materials, just to see, it's a nice way to sort of prototype. So if you drag, in this case I'm looking at this painted rusty machinery look, I want to drag that up into the layers, and then that just automatically applies this paint material to the model. And you see how this paint material, we're getting our reflection of our environment, but it also has like a lot of grunge effects and shiny effects built into it, which can be hard to see, but you can also modify how much those show up on the model. And you can see where we're getting rust laid out based on model geometry. And that's because of these maps that we've baked, these world space normals and all these other maps, thicknesses. So if we look at, if you want to edit this particular material, you just open it up. It's a folder. And what it is, it's a series of rust, dust, dirt, and then this metal base. So it layers on top. And then each one of these effects on top have a mask applied to them that you can modify when you click on the mask. So if you want to change the color, you can change the material for that. So we may want to go and check out this rust and look at, not the channels, but the basic parameters. No, I don't want that much. Let's see, look at the advanced. So when you look at the advanced, this is the actual material itself. So one thing we may want, this rust is all kind of all over brown. If you change the sharpen intensity, it'll vary it and it'll sharpen up the actual rust, because the brown is has a kind of rusty metal look below it. We might want some more oxidation in our rust, so you can crank that up. Color noisiness, you can crank that up and it'll change the noise value of it. Surface imperfections, I don't really see that adjusting much. This dirt intensity you can crank up, and you'll see the scratches start to show up a little bit more because the dirt's collecting in the scratches. Dirt contrast might show a little bit better. And then we'll leave the dirt scale at 1. If we crank that up, the dirt's going to get kind of repetitive. And then this rust intensity, I like it sort of all over rusty, but if you want to take that down, then you can see what it would look like if it was not rusty. The metal's brown, so it shows up sort of like dark. It's an oxidized metal, and then if you add the rust, it just cranks up the oxidation to the point where it starts to flake. Let's see, I think that's pretty good for that. Now the thing that we want to play with, right now we just have one smart material applied, and it applies. But the cool thing about this is we can layer materials on materials so that we start to get this more interesting, realistic effect. Because this by itself is just procedural, and it's using these like basic grunge maps and things, and it sort of looks good, but at the same time it doesn't look super realistic yet. if we want to make it look more realistic, I'm going to leave it yellow for now, but we'll come back and change the color in a minute. We can add a mask to it, a smart mask, and further layer that on top of whatever might be under this. So the first, to see the effect, we want to add probably this like steel rust scratch, or maybe, yeah. Let's take this material and we'll just drag it up into the layer. And just so it's under the machinery so you don't see it, but if I turn off the machinery, then we just added this material. So this is the material that's below, kind of a more shiny, less oxidized material, although it's got a lot to it as well. If we want to modify that, we can. So the rust, maybe we want to, let's see what we have baked just on this rust. So basically it's just a grunge, there's no color to it that I can tell. It's getting its color from this actual grunge rust fine material, which is probably in one of these settings. So it's kind of a gray. We can't really modify that without modifying the material, but we could drag another material in there and use that instead. Yeah, the base metal. So maybe for the base metal, just to see the effect, if we select that, then we can actually affect the color, and we can make it look a little bit more like what our other base metal looked like. So you can see I can take that down, and let's take it towards red, but we want to get it more in the brown range. It looks kind of coppery. Yeah, that looks good. So now we have this sort of oxidation on top of steel look. So let's leave that for a second. Now we want to see how we can layer this paint on top of that metal. So to do that, you have to right click, add a white mask, so it'll show through. So now we still get our paint. And then we can go under Smart Mask here in our shelf and use perhaps this surface rust material and just drag that into the mask channel. And now you see where it's gone and layered the two together. So this is just the steel, and that's with the paint, but it's layering it in a way where it's too transparent. We want to get our paint back. So what you do is you go and you modify the mask itself and change the global balance, crank it up. So you can see that we now have this is without the mask, and that's with it. So we're showing through to the metal below. So that's without the mask, you get just straight through to the rust, and then you get this layered effect on top. So there's a little less rust and more metal shining through, which looks a little more realistic. Plus, we're getting these ambient occlusion type of effects that make it look more realistic, because these are where the joints would bend, and that's where the wear on the paint would happen most. You can change the global contrast. Leave that where it was. You can change the texture amount. Texture 2, which is an additional kind of layering of texture. Let's see what else. The balance of this texture, if we want to apply more or less to allow it to show just some of the paint through. So yeah, maybe something like that. It's pretty beat up. That looks good though. All right, and the thickness doesn't seem to have an effect, or the contrast of that. It's not bad. All right, so now let's go and change our metal base here, the color. We might want to change that to a different paint color. So let's go for like this blue maybe. Yeah, that looks good. We'll go ahead and save this for now. Save it as Bender 2. So now that I have something that I actually kind of like, I can take and once I get this back, I can copy these two effects and paste them into the other, copy the layers and paste them onto each one of these texture sets if I want them to be the same. And in this case I kind of do. So paste. Now the arms are updated, then the head. Looks pretty good. And the legs. All right. So there's our general robotic materials. They could use some work, but I'm trying to just cut through this fairly quickly. So now let's say we want to go and add some details. So like on the torso, we want to add some compartments in his chest. Using this layer that we have, the original layer, we can paint into that using these hard surface objects. So if you take that, select it, we want to make sure that we select a brush. So I usually will go for this default hard, and then we'll turn on, the normal map's turned on for it. So then in the normal, you can change the color, and we can actually, you could change the color and just paint like a bump, like a rough bump. So if this is default, so notice how it's 50 across, 50 both ways. We crank that up, and then we go and we draw. Well, I'm painting with a color, so I only want to paint normal here. So I need to, right here in the material, turn off color, metal, we'll leave the height, and we'll turn off roughness. So now when I paint, I'm painting this sort of bump, which if I had a blur to this brush using the alpha shape, let me change, or the hardness actually, I'll blur it. Then you'll see there's a bit of an edge to it. What I'm wanting to do though is, I'll leave that sharp, and I want to take this normal uniform color and actually use one of these bevels. So if I do this normal bevel cross, then I get the actual bump the way I want it. So I can take these procedurals, not the procedurals, the hard surfaces, and find a cab, like an they have these doors set up here. I just need to find it, like a compartment. Let's see. There's a vent. So what I'm interested in is, it looks like it has hinges. Here we go. One of these, like this or this, kind of like this one or that one. This one. And then if I go and, what I want to do is drag that into my cross, and then I'm going to change my brush size to be full, or actually I'm going to, whoops. So if I stamp that, it looks like he's got this compartment there. If I drag stamp, then I get multiple versions of that. So that's in the actual spacing here. So you can crank the spacing so that it's far apart. You have to drag a while in order to get it to repeat. Like that. I can also stamp it here. But then I don't really know where I'm stamping it. If I wanted to rotate like that, I'm basically holding Alt while I'm dragging, and then if I hold down Shift, it'll lock. And then if I hold trying to remember how to move this. So if you hold down Control, okay, basically changing the flow of the brush there. You can notice that as I was dragging, I was holding down Control, I changed the flow. If I do middle mouse and Alt and drag, then I get this, the ability to move the texture, and then mouse wheel just zooms in. So if I wanted to paint, notice that I'm painting this bumps here. The best way to do it I've found is if you hold down Shift and then middle mouse drag to center, and then change the size of your brush as a stamp. You're kind of stamping it there. I don't really like that normal that I picked, so I'm going to choose this other one and see what it does instead. Hold down Shift to get it to snap so it's facing you. And stamp. So it's an inverse stamp. So what I want, actually, if you change the width of this, it'll change its size within the stamp itself. And then you can actually change the amount of the stamp using the height. But that's doing the brush as well in the background. So actually we want to leave the height alone. It's another way to paint with a stamp is to use the alpha mask. I painted it at an angle there. Yeah. So there's a compartment, and we'll put one on the back, because why not? So I'm still getting a little bit of an edge here, so what I can do is if I set, let's turn off height actually, then we don't get the stamp. But we turn off height, then we can actually see our stamp. You can see that the stamp is sort of cut off by the brush. That's in this width control, right? And then you can change the let's see, stroke opacity, not the brush size. It's in the alpha here in the shape. So if we go, the hardness is set to 1. Let's do like a square alpha maybe. Just gotta find it. Most of these are set for circular, but then there's a shape brick. And then the hardness is down so we can make it harder. Let's try that. Still shows up round. Maybe there's a, nope, that's physical paint. And it fits better at least. So if we stamp that, then we get our compartment. So now we, oops, accidentally stamped one more. Then we may want to do something on the chest here. So let's find maybe like one of these compartments. Let me bring up my brush. Looking for a side door here. And just change the size of the brush. Make sure we're projecting relatively straight on, and yeah, it looks good. So then we'll do it on the back too. Whoops. Make it bigger. It looks good. All right, so now that we have these, they don't really blend. Like you can see that the paint goes across the actual gaps that we've created. So if we want to fix that, and you can turn them off and on using this layer because they're just normal maps applied on top of the model. But if you want to be able to see so that they look like they're part of the actual material below, you can add a filter, this filter here, and then in the filter, because it's empty, you want to select that one that I pointed out earlier, this matte effects filter, edgeware, and you see where that then takes that bump and allows it to show through. Now the problem is it's showing through to a material that isn't under it in the first place, and that's where we have this metal norm, height, everything else. So what you want is to lose the metal and the roughness, keep the height. No, the height's not really doing anything anyway. And then we can change the color, but the color is what we want to use. So we can change the wear level. And you see how it starts to play with the texture underneath, and then the wear contrast, the edge smoothness, the other thing is we can actually change the input mode from normal to height. Not sure why we get this circle there. Must have, let me look. No, oh, because the height map, I had it turned on there. That's why it shows the wear. So we don't want to change it to height because we actually use the normal instead. But there's a slight height difference there. That's okay. We're not really using height in Unity. It's all texture map based. And then we can change the grunge scale. We'll leave that down though. Then we go to our material settings. So we have this PBR roughness and PBR glossiness, and then our settings control down here. So you can change the curvature intensity, taking it down a notch. So you see what's going on is we're getting the inverse of what we want. The paint is actually collected in the gaps, and we want the opposite. So what you can do is you can invert the curvature. Now we get the wear in the corners. And you can do combined. Let's see. We're going to leave that. We'll go back and check out our wear level. That's too much. Edge smoothness. Basically, I'm trying to get the wear amount up. I'm just playing around with these curvatures too. So that's the curvature intensity. It may be that we need the combo, or the AO spreading may work. Take that down. We'll leave this combination to get what we want. Yeah, so like play around with the curvature intensity, and you start to get that wear on the edges. One thing we can do is we could also like take this level down so it blends a little bit better. We can basically change the normal amount. But what I want to do is play with this PBR metallic roughness, because that's where our base color is coming from. We can basically pull that back down to something that matches closer to what our metal should look like. This is a way of getting that, making these normal map changes that you've painted into it to start to blend with the materials below. So the metallic, we do want the metallic to shine through because that's where, but we also want like maybe less roughness so it's shining. That'll show up more on the paint. Yeah, it looks good. Alright, so that gives you a rough idea of how to put normal maps on it. Now let's go and modify his head here. So we've got this Bender mat head. Let me go ahead and save. I want to change these teeth, which is here, I think. So what I can do is in this material, I can create an entirely new material on top of it. Just make a new layer. Whoops, put that up there. Close this out, and we'll take one of our materials as a starting point. And we may want to go and look at a smart material instead, because we're going to just paint a mask to mask out the teeth. Let's see. Actually, let's look at our smart materials. So maybe instead of steel bright, what is that? We'll go for this steel rust, so there's like no paint on his teeth. It'll be the same metal that we had in the other, so we'll drag that. And it covers everything on the head, as we expect. We can add a mask, and in this case we're going to want to add a black mask to knock everything back out. And then we're going to paint using this polygon tool right here, this little square with an arrow. It says polygon fill. Notice when we turn that on, everything, the mesh goes red. And we have this option to drag and select this color. And what we want to do is we want to paint white to reveal that material below. So now we get the teeth metal object showing through. And if we go and we mess with this material, we can actually change things. So let's change the base metal color to something brighter. Right? So his teeth look nicer. And some metal scratches, we might do the same. Actually, let's see, maybe the base metal needs to be a little bit lower. Yeah, like that. Turn off the wear. Maybe we turn the wear down using this global control, the global balance, and the contrast. Yeah, the contrast helps. That looks good. There we go. So there's his teeth metal. Now if we want to do the same trick we did in terms of making these doors, we can make a mouth, we can make teeth in his mouth using that same tool or brush. So if we go to our brushes, default hard, go down to, probably should have turned that into a tool. What we can do is we'll change the, I'm on the head, let's see. Let's do this. So that, and there's a generator. The texture. I think it's because I'm still on this level. I need to be up here. I'm on Bender mat head. I've added this new material. Oh, I need to make a new layer. So new layer, we'll drag that up on top. Now we get our brush back. And what we need to do is find like a slice tool. This bevel line will probably work. Yeah. So notice that the line is vertical, which is fine. Let's see, if I just paint that, see we get a little gap in the teeth, except it's also applying across the edge here to his head. So what we want to do is make this gap smaller. That's what happens sometimes. It's like we need to, so you'll hold a slice like this, and then hold down Shift and Control and drag a straight line, and then you get your gap that way. And you can do it back to get a thicker one. So maybe we change the bevel thickness. Yeah, make it thicker so we get more of a gap. And there, that's a nice line. Let's do one down the middle. Yep. And then we'll do one down this side. And then we can split. There we go. So now we have some teeth. Now if we want to rotate this and to get a horizontal line, all you have to do is go up here and then take this little angle tool and just drag it to the top. I held down Shift so it snapped to 90. And now we get a horizontal line. We have our teeth. We could paint a black fill if we wanted. Just make another layer on top and paint with black. Turn the color back on for this brush. In fact, let's do that. New layer. And what I'll want to turn on is the alpha is fine, but I do want color in this case. So when I make that color, I just turn it to black. And I may want to change the metal as well. So by cranking up the metallicity, it'll have this kind of blackish. Maybe I go less, and then I'll also do roughness. So we're sort of painting this material that will be part of this. So, and we can control with the overlay here. We'll probably just make it like a multiply, but for now I'll make it just the color. Now we can take our brush and make it smaller, and then again holding down Shift, just paint a stripe across. Might be too big. I think what we want is a softer alpha 2, so we'll go with a white shape. I need to crank up the spacing. No, take it down, I mean. There we go. And then we'll just fill in these bumps with color. And notice that we still get the bump, but the teeth, just color just shows through. So now if we want to make that less harsh, we can make it multiply, and then take this intensity so that it's just darker, but doesn't like look too cartoony. All right, so there's this teeth. Let's go ahead and save. We'll deal with the visor here in Unity because we don't need, it's going to end up being glass, so we don't really need to worry too much about the material for that. But all right, so we crashed, so I'm gonna have to go back and paint these eyes again. I lost my name layers, but that's fine. We'll go ahead and make a new layer for the eyes. We'll name this one eyes. Save it. And we're gonna, oh, sorry, I did the wrong thing again. Actually, did I? Let me do it this way. Instead of applying that material, that's the reason our material was weird in the previous one. So let's go plus, make a new layer, call it eyes. We're going to fill with this material. We'll do just a straight material. Find a plastic if we can. In fact, we'll do this matte plastic area right here with that blue matte paint. or blue matte plastic. It's going to do all this other stuff too. We only care about it on the eyes. What I want to do is I want to change that blue color to white. That's what I want to fill with right there. Right now it's just replacing everything, which is okay because we're going to mask it out. Okay, but main thing is to make sure that our eyes are covered. And then if we add a black mask, it'll block it back out, and we can use this polygon fill using white to just get the eyes there. That's what we wanted to do. Let's save that. And now we can, let's try, we saved it. Let's make a new layer. Do the exact same thing, but with black. So we're going to fill with black. Just here. Actually, I'm not liking the way that black's filling. It's too rough. Let's go reflective and dark metal. There we go. So basically I'm just showing through, I'm just trying to get this black tops of the eyes. This is okay because we're going to mask it out. So we'll add a black mask and we will fill with white. Yep. We just want to cover the top two parts. And what that did was, let me save this. So what that did was it painted our pupils on him. Whoops. Slowly zooming in and out. So you can see he's got these dark pupils now and his eyes are white. All right. We may want to darken these back planes too. Let me look at what we have. So there's probably this we want to darken, and I can just fill with, actually let's fill the entire thing with black, or just fill this part. Here and here, and then here. You don't see anything because I'm not revealing it yet, but now I can with the polygon because I want these black back panes in his visor. All right, so I think that's pretty much all we need to do with him. If he looks okay, I could add other things, like you could use these. So if we wanted to paint a new layer of just details, like we can take the alphas, and I think there's a barcode here. We can paint this barcode using this material that I've made of paint. If we wanted to add like grunge to it, we could do that. So like this base color could end up becoming from like this black and white spotted or whatever, any of these grunge materials, which we could then change. So like we could do this dirt, yeah, and then using that we can change the how it works. So then if we paint, let me zoom in, this barcode, actually the alpha should go, I'm just looking for, yeah, here. So the threshold and the width and the height. Yeah, that looks good. Then we've just transferred that onto his model. So maybe we want to change the roughness that we're painting with this, because it's kind of low. So the roughness is really low. Let's go a little bit, crank up the metallic just a tiny bit. That looks better. And then if you wanted to do the same thing, we also have this mask that's actually, you can do fonts. Where did I find them? Here we go, this area text. Let's see which one is going to work the best. Probably, let's go with text area. So what you'll see when you look at this text area, actually it's an actual outline. I thought it was text. Some of these have, there's like fonts, procedurally generated. Here they are, these fonts. So if you select one of those, like this font typewriter, then you get the ability to change the input. So it'd be 00111, 0011, 00111, something like that. And then you get the numbers there. So we need to change the size. Yeah. And you can stamp that on top. So we just gave them a barcode. All right, so anyway, that gives you a rough idea of how to play around with Substance Painter. All right, for the final bit, we'll take them into Unity and show how to rig them and use these textures in that. So we'll save this model, and we can File, Export Textures. We want to export them all. We're exporting them as the template, Unity 5 template. You'll see when we're exporting, we're getting this albedo transparency, metallic smoothness, normal, and emission map, which we don't really have any emission stuff going on. If we wanted to, we could. By emission, it means it'll just create a map so that it'll actually emit light from spots, but he doesn't really have any lights on him right now, so let's do export that. Let me make sure I'm exporting it to the right place. D. And we're going to put it in these materials, textures. We'll put it in Blender here. Select the folder. And that should do it. Export. Export shader parameters. JSON with the parameters of all the shader instances. Yeah, we'll leave that for now. Export. Okay, say okay. We've saved this, we can quit. We'll go ahead and save it again. All right, so in Unity, we've got our Blender fixed UVs model. I just drag him into the scene. He comes in a little small, and that's because we, in Maya, we modeled at a different resolution, but that's okay. We can work with that. We'll just scale him up to fit. This is a scene that I think I've used in other projects. So he comes in, he's got this basic look because we haven't applied the materials that we've done in Substance Painter yet. But the thing you have to be aware of is that we can leverage these materials that we were painting in Substance Painter, but they're part of Blender's prefab. And we can't edit them here, so you need to go and open, like if you look at his model, we can open his prefab, select these 4 materials, and then say extract from prefab. And we'll want to put on I have this materials folder. I'll put them in there and just select that folder. Now it's going to go and extract them. And if I look at the materials here, those are all still applied. They're basic standard materials, but now I can actually edit them. So where we've gone and imported our textures, this Bender texture folder here, we have all of our textures imported that we've painted in Substance Painter. Let me make sure, yeah, these are all set up because I've done this already. But if we go to our materials, select our Bender, let's do our matte torso first. So you can go and click on the albedo map, and we have Bender in the name. So then we can say Bender matte torso albedo transparency. Select that. That comes up. Then for the metallic, we can apply our Bender matte torso metallic smoothness. Notice how it changed. We want to use the metallic alpha, so we'll use that. Can change the smoothness, but it's set to be full 1 since we're controlling it with a map. Then we'll change our normal map. Same thing, Bender matte torso normal, and that gives us our painted ports on his chest. And that's pretty much it for that. Then we can do his head. So we'll go Bender matte head albedo transparency and a metallic matte head metallic smoothness. We have our metallic alpha set up, and then the normal map. Bender normal for his matte head. Alright, so if you look at that, we get this, you can see how well the materials work in Unity. So let me crank up this directional light. Oh, it's actually showing up, but is the angle right? Yeah. So you can see I've got this directional light, and you can kind of see where it's specular on the paint, and as we roll over, you see here in the head, the dust and the dirt wash it out. That's the nice thing about these these PBR textures, is you can add a lot of realism to them pretty quickly, and you get a really nice result out of Unity. So let's go ahead and modify his arms. Bender matte and arms albedo transparency. Bender metallic smoothness. Make sure we're using the metallic alpha. And the reason that we set it to use the metallic alpha is when we exported this from Unity, from Substance Painter, we're getting this material here, and the material, if you look at it, is a RGB image, but it actually has an alpha channel, this RGBA in it. And if you look at the alpha is different from the actual image. So what we've done is we've gone and combined two different texture maps coming out of Substance Painter and made them using one image. And that way we can leverage using this input texture alpha. I'm sorry. Yeah, so input texture alpha here on that. We can leverage that alpha channel in the actual material. Here, so that using this metallic alpha, it's going to be pulling that alpha there and then using that as a control map. Otherwise, you'd get two sliders here. So, yeah, we applied the normal map. Let's do it for his legs. Bender. This will be Bender. I think this one's called Blend. Yeah, Blend 4. albedo transparency. We'll do the map. Metallic smoothness, and then the normal. All right. Everything's good. Yeah, it looks good. All right, so now that we have him textured, let's save the scene and save the project. What we want to do is copy the settings. Oh wait, I have to apply this glass to his visor here. And that's that. So you can see where the texture came through on his eyes, and because the visor is a separate part, I could just drag this pre-made glass that I made and drag it onto his visor. So the glass was just basically an albedo with a transparency and an alpha set for it, and then I used this fade rendering mode to allow me to get metallic and smoothness working. Otherwise, if you use straight transparency, the metallic overrides the transparency kind of that way. So what you can do is if you just do this fade, you get the best of both worlds. It's kind of a composited glass then. All right, so what I need to do is select his model. So I've got him. He's not rigged or anything right now, so I need to select him and turn him into a character for Unity. So if I select the object that I'm using, you'll see this rig, the model pops up here. You could also select it here, but here's his model settings. Here's his rig settings. If he has any animations baked, that'd be there. Here's his materials that he's default using. So we could change materials if we wanted to. The rig, we want to go to animation type and set it to humanoid so that it actually works with mech anim. And then when you do that, you're going to, it says this avatar can be configured after settings have been applied, so we need to apply that. And now if we hit configure, it's going to ask us to save. And then he'll come up, and if his bones go green, which they should because we did this in Maya, everything should map correctly. Then we can say done. And now he's ready to, we can set him up as a character. So what we'll do is we'll copy, if we want to turn him into a third-person character, we can copy the settings that we have on this other character, or we can go to the standard assets and get the third-person character, but in this case I've already done it for Igor. We can copy the parts that we need to transfer to Bender here because all he has is his animator. So if we have this rigid body, copy that, and then select Bender, and you have to right click on the actual component that already exists and say paste component. If you do it down here, it won't show up. So paste component is new. Now we have a rigid body. Copy the capsule collider, which probably won't fit since we had to scale him up, and paste that. Paste component is new. So notice that this capsule collider gets scaled up, so we have to make it smaller. So what we can do is we'll change the radius, something like maybe 2.5. Its height's too high, and it's too tall. So the height should be maybe 3. I see it's too high, so we can shift that down, get it centered, and then scale the height, shift it up a little bit. All right, so that's 0.658. It's kind of fine, and then we can do 0.27 on the, not the radius, the height, 1.6. Shift it up some more, go to 7.2. I'm just adjusting it so that it fits him at the feet. 5. That looks pretty good, I think. Maybe 7. All right, so now he's got the capsule collider size to him. We can copy Igor's third-person character script, copy this component, and then select Bender and paste. Component is new. Then we get our third-person character script. Then we can copy our user control, copy the component, paste that. All right, so now we have everything set up for him to become a third-person character. Last thing we have to do is set this controller to third-person animator controller. And if we hit play, we should see him. Igor's going to run off because I've got this character. Because he's being controlled by a timeline. But you'll see Bender looks like he's falling. And the reason is that in this third-person character script, the ground check distance is too small because we pasted it as new. You need to make that like 0.1. And then he'll actually animate with the, you can animate him using your input, your controller. But what we want to do is we want to try to make him follow with Igor here. So we're going to break this controller here so that it doesn't double out on the control. And then we'll add him to our timeline just so we can see him move. He's also set up for real time since he's a real-time character. So what we'll do is we'll take and drag Bender, fixed UVs, into this animator down here where we had the original. Now he's set up to run. And if you watch him run, he actually animates. And the lights interact with him. So let's do play. So you can see how the lights reflect and the material looks fairly real. So hopefully that explains the process of setting up PBR materials using Substance Painter, but you can paint them in Photoshop or whatever. It's just Substance Painter is really good at doing this. It's specifically meant for this kind of work. The one thing you need to understand too is that in order for him to reflect these things correctly, I have these reflection probes set up. And rather than having one reflection probe for the entire scene, I've set up multiple reflection probes that overlap based on this blend distance. And then that way, as he moves through each one, he'll slowly blend reflection to reflection to reflection, and you get all of these boxes and things set up to blend on him. So that's the way that works. Anyway, hopefully you like this tutorial. If you have any questions, just leave them in the comments.